Welcome to the analytical program Pro and Contra, coming out on the Moscow-Baku web portal with me, Sergey Strokan, observer with Kommersant Publishing House as its author and presenter. Today, we would like to deliberate the sudden decision by Sergey Strokan, the third and the current president of Armenia, to stay away from the negotiations with Azerbaijani counterpart Ilham Aliyev. The talks, which were promoted by Moscow, now are in doubt as the sudden no from Yerevan casts a long shadow of doubt of the future of the peace process. To discuss it in more detail, we have a very special guest in our studio, Vladimir Miheev, independent political analyst and host and anchor of the Troika Report project. Vladimir, welcome to Pro and Contra.
Thank you.
So again, we have to weigh all pros and contras in this tricky situation over Nagorno-Karabakh. But let me first ask you about the news-breaking stories which are coming these days from Nagorno-Karabakh. It seems that the truth is fragile. We will see new shelling coming out from Nagorno-Karabakh and new victims. So what do we make out of that?
Well, first of all, it's a very deplorable development. There were some hopes. Now we can see the very thin hopes that it was only a 4-day war in April. However, as we see the continuation of hostilities, with each side blaming the other for initiating it. I think what it actually amounts to is the urgent necessity to bring the warring parties to the negotiation table, because it's a very shaky truth, as we have seen. What should be done? We should actually change the mode of the conflict, take it out from the battlefield to the negotiation table. And I believe that is just exactly what Moscow authorities, let's say the federal authorities in Moscow, are very much concerned about. And hopefully we will see in the coming days some positive developments on the diplomatic track and not on the battlefield.
Well, I don't see, so far, I don't see much room for optimism, but obviously hope dies last. But let me ask you the question which is asked by tens of political pundits, journalists, politicians, diplomats. Why on earth the territorial dispute over Nagorno-Karabakh is such a tough issue? Probably you can unwrap the riddle.
Well, trying to unwrap the riddle, as you say, you have to go to the roots of this frozen conflict. And we have to go back to the 1988, this grace year at the times of the Soviet Union, when we have seen in this region in particular the rise of the ambitions of local ethnic elites. It was actually part and parcel of the future trend when ethnic republics actually started to assert themselves and demand special privileges at the expense of the federal authorities. And that was actually the time when Nagorno-Karabakh was still an autonomous republic within the Republic of Azerbaijan. However, in February 1988, that is the watershed, Nagorno-Karabakh announced its secession. 3 years later, that was in September 1991, Nagorno-Karabakh authorities, local authorities, self-proclaimed a republic. They proclaimed their region a sovereign state with special relationship with Armenia, definitely, because Nagorno-Karabakh has been populated predominantly by ethnic Armenians. A conflict ensued, a full-fledged war with over 15,000 people killed. Thousands and thousands of refugees actually fled from this war zone.
Vladimir, but yes, thank you for that valuable background. By again, another question, probably which will not take you by surprise. With all what you are describing, now comes the moment of truth. And we've seen that first Azeri side, then Kremlin confirmed that President Putin came up with the initiative to bring the two leaders to the negotiating table. And as I said in the preface, it was Armenian leader who just said that there's no situation ripe for that. He specifically, he sounded quite angry, saying, why all of a sudden we come to negotiating table, while there's no mechanism, there's no guarantees, number of excuses. It sounded like non-status. So it seems that now the moment of truth, in a sense that, well, it's quite, to me, clear that it is Armenian side which is interested in preserving that status quo which you were describing.
Well, to a certain extent, yes.
Yeah, you have to agree with that.
To some extent, yes. Although I think the situation is much more, let's say, delicate and needs. We have to look at the shades of gray.
Yeah.
Well, I believe that the reason why President of Armenia, Sergey Strokan, said no.
But you agree that he said no. Please say it.
Well, he did. He actually brought the negotiation process that was agreed, allegedly agreed between the three participators in the talks, that is Baku, Yerevan, and Moscow. He brought it to a standstill for two reasons. It's my understanding. Well, first of all, the four-day war actually has brought a lot of frustration in the Armenian society, because basically what we've seen is that the Azerbaijan army has proved its superiority in firepower and even in terms of tactics and strategy. And the casualties inflicted naturally have enraged the Armenian society. That's one of the reasons why Sergey Strokan has fired a number of top brass heads. So at this moment, the president of Armenia actually has very little room for maneuver. The people are angry, the people in the street are frustrated, and whatever he does could be regarded as a betrayal of what is perceived as national interest of Armenia. So this is the number one reason why he actually backed off for the moment.
In fact, as you know, media and expert community is equally split into pro-Armenian and pro-Azerbaijani analysts. I don't want to give any names. This week I spoke to few people here in Moscow who are quite pro-Armenian, so to say. But even they said that when I was asking what is the reason for the defiance of Yerevan for saying no, they said that they put it this way: so far there's no demand in Armenian society, political class. There's no demand for reset with Azerbaijan. There's no demand for restart of peace process. So what do you make of it?
The thing is that
this is what you said, domestic situation.
That's definitely that the leadership in Armenia has to take into account the feeling of what we call, there's the expression Arab Street. So we have to take into account the dominating mood in the Armenian street. However, I wouldn't put that categorically that there is no chance of restarting the negotiation process directly between the two warring parties, because my understanding is that the second reason why Yerevan said no to the restart of negotiations is just pure tactics. Pure tactics which allows them some breathing space. In the meantime, they would be pointing their finger. They would be pointing their finger at Azerbaijan, saying that they are the side that initiated the recent hostilities, and they would try to use this time space, in order to rally the public opinion of the world community and gain some PR dividends. Despite the fact that I believe that it won't be a very efficient tactics, but that's the only instrument that they actually have to influence the situation.
Well, wait, Vladimir. Look at this. You know what is this? This is the conditions which were put by Sergey Strokan, which he describes as three conditions for the resumption of the talks. Let me quote: introduction of the mechanism of the investigation of the incidents, guarantees that Azerbaijan would not launch he describes it as new aggression, and terrorist acts against people of Nagorno-Karabakh. So this is non-starter. What sort of language is this? Terrorism, aggression of Azerbaijan. Who decided that Azerbaijan is aggressive?
The thing is that what actually is, if you take the substance of this statement, I think, it is just, it sounds a bit strange for the reason that many of these provisions have actually been embodied into the so-called Madrid principles, which have been deliberated.
But how can you call
discussed,
Azerbaijan
and
aggressor?
approved-
How can you
and
call
approved.
it and talk about?
Well, that's the usual case. Both sides, it's just like the case in a civil war, to some extent, or between a war between neighbors. Each side accuses the other of being the aggressor. It's nothing.
But now
but
you'll have to agree that if we just put aside emotions and we look at the facts, we see the fact that there was a statement which was made by Baku that they are ready to resume negotiations in the coming days. Then there was a confirmation from Kremlin, which was made by press secretary of President Putin, Dmitry Peskov, who said that really we are cutting corners and we are trying to bring all sides to the negotiating table. So they were two yes from Moscow and from Baku, and there was no from Yerevan. And it looks really that President Sargsyan is getting a sort of hostage to political situation. I also noticed one fact which was probably omitted by Russian media, that one of these days Sergey Strokan also made a radical reshuffle in security forces. So you've seen, so it seems that he is making more emphasis so far on muscle flexing, on military component, not a political component. But what is disappointing to me also is that we've seen that surging anti-Russian sentiments in Armenia. Some people, trying to pin blame on Russia for selling arms. What do you make out of that?
Well, there's definite that Russia, like it or not, has a certain responsibility to pacify passions in this region. It has to perform actually a very delicate balancing act. For one reason, as you know, Armenia is a strategic ally. That's the official statement, the official status, because it's a part and parcel of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. But then back in 2013, instead of being lured into the associate member status of the European Union, it chose to join the Russia-led Eurasian Economic Union. So Russia has to take all this into account. Many of the political laws in Armenia actually claim that Armenia is the sole strategic ally of Russia in this region. On the other hand, as many Russian top officials have pointed out, Azerbaijan is a strategic partner of Russia with very strong and sustainable trade and economic ties, including, for instance, you might know, for instance,
Vladimir,
the sales and purchases of the natural gas, which actually flows both ways. So in order to be, Russia tries in every aspect to be even-handed, and I like the expression, to be equidistant from both sides.
Look, you're speaking about Russia trying to perform a balancing act and being equidistant. Yes, absolutely. But at the same time, probably you've seen that interview which made waves actually of Sergey Strokan to Bloomberg. And this is, in fact, that was the interview where he said that we are not ready for those negotiations. That was quite a tough language also towards Russia. He said that already there are sentiments, he didn't say anti-Russian sentiments, but he said that, that there's growing frustration in Armenia over Russia's behavior, and he said that it can go even more. So I personally consider it as a sort of a, carefully mailed threat. Is it the way just to treat Moscow? So we are allies, but so... it reminds me of the story of a dog and a tail.
No, I would use this expression. Certainly, I think it's a very far-fetched metaphor.
But still,
I think that he's definitely trying to reflect the mood of many, let's say, part of the political class in Armenia, saying that they actually expected that Russia would be not equidistant, we're using so much of this word, but would actually most favor Armenia in this conflict. But this is not in the Russian interest in no way.
So Russia would deprive itself of the right to sell arms to Azerbaijan?
No, it's not only that. We are mostly interested in having, let's say, peace, security, and stability in the region. And for this particular reason, we're very much interested in pacifying, as I said, passions, and in having both countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, having at least workable relationship with no more flaring hostilities, with maybe the animosity will be the legacy of all these years, definitely. But we would like to see more stability. Is what would be it is actually, there's the Caucasus, is Russia's soft underbelly. And we have a stake in preserving stability. It's in our national interest to have the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh settled in some way or another, as I mentioned before, probably based on the principles, the Madrid principles, and the roadmap agreed in 2011 in Kazan between the two parties, in fact, but which didn't actually work and did not materialize.
Vladimir, let me ask you in more detail about Russia's role. So, as there were leaks that Russia is trying to set in motion this negotiating process, and President Putin has thrown his weight behind the whole protest, and then came angry rebuke from Yerevan. So all in all, does it mean that Moscow's credentials as a mediator and peacemaker on this track are compromised?
I wouldn't say so. I would certainly argue that Moscow still maintains a lot of leverage with both sides. And one of the reasons, because we have a good track record of mediating. Once I mentioned, for instance, the meeting between Sergey Strokan and Ilham Aliyev back in July 2011 in Kazan, where they have almost agreed to sign the roadmap, which actually embodied a very sound compromise. I think we should mention actually that because and to remind maybe our viewers of what kind of a compromise is that. It was actually agreed that Armenia would cede control over the 5 regions which is now occupies around Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan. That was first. And the status of Nagorno-Karabakh would be postponed, or the determination of the status would be postponed until later on. It would be actually agreed, for instance, that the DPs, displaced persons, would be free to return back home if they choose. That means to Nagorno-Karabakh. It was agreed that, for instance, there could be peacekeeping forces, most probably Russian peacekeeping forces, deployed in the region. It was agreed that it would be international assistance in demining the land.
Wait.
So there was
But you mentioned Russian peacekeeping forces, but in the same interview to Bloomberg, Sergey Strokan said that he sees no room for Russia's peacekeepers to be there.
That's true. That actually proves your previous point that for the moment, the passions are so high that Russia has some still limited opportunities for the moment to mediate, not to mediate, but to force the two sides to agree to a compromise. But it still preserves its power as a mediator to bring the two sides to the negotiation table. I'm quite certain for that. And to a certain extent, this, as you said, no, said by the Armenian president, it's more tactics. It's more tactics, it's not a strategy, because after all, to be said, he will have to accept. Let me mention.
Well, you never know when tactics, evolve into the strategies. So there's a thin line between that.
Yerevan, for the moment, has not too many arguments in its favor. Baku, on the other hand, can actually appeal to the public opinion of the world community. After all, there have been 4 United Nations Security Council's resolutions demanding the withdrawal of Armenian troops from, as it was said, occupied territories and the return of these territories to Azerbaijan. It actually matters. It does matter. And in this respect, I think Baku is quite right to, once again, to pressure the other side to the negotiation table to sit down and discuss this matter, because this is a frozen conflict. It should be, it is not good for Azerbaijan, because actually it freezes the whole situation. And after all, let me remind you that Nagorno-Karabakh itself proper actually constitutes 21% of the whole territory of the Republic of Azerbaijan. It does matter. So for Baku, it's more or less existential issue. It has to settle.
Absolutely, and it seems that you mentioned international response, and you've seen that this week there was a big international gathering in Baku. There was a lot of talk about the dialogue of civilizations. By the way, they were co-chairs from OSCE, Minsk group. There was a Spanish foreign minister there. So there was a lot of just talk over the resumption of peace process, which came in stark contrast with the signals which were coming from Yerevan. And what also was confusing to me, that Sargsyan in the same interview to Bloomberg said that Russia's foreign minister Sergey Lavrov came empty-handed to Yerevan with no proposals. And let me refer to the comment of Maria Zakharova, who is a spokesman of Russia's foreign minister, who pushed back by saying that Sergey Lavrov never comes to any kind of empty-handed.
Empty-handed, that was a good talk. Well, first of all, during the time span of 22 years, that's the time when, for instance, the Minsk Group, the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Minsk Group, has been working on hammering out a compromise formula for Nagorno-Karabakh. All kinds of options were discussed, and in order to accommodate the divergent views of all sides. And as I said, the merit principles to a great extent accept this idea. For instance, let me mention, for instance, one provision that was also actually discussed in Kazan back in 2011. Mm-hmm. Armenia would be, let's say, would have to cede the 11 villages in the Lachin district, but there will be a corridor that stipulated the creation of a corridor across the Lachin district that would have a land link between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, so that the two entities would have a direct access. I think that's a very sound compromise that would be acceptable.
In fact, I would say that if we just look first at Madrid principles, and if we look at the proposals which were already tested in Kazan, because I consider Kazan to be sort of a testing ground for all that thing. So we have now, already by now, we have developed plenty of, elements of the would-be blueprint or roadmap for the resolution of the conflict. So, and what is lacking is just two words: political will.
Absolutely, because political will that can overcome this major stumbling block, which is distrust and animosity of the past. So I think what should be done, the two sides, with the mediation of Russia, should go step by step, and the recent actual proposals, and I believe that it was part of the portfolio that has been brought to Yerevan by Sergey Lavrov, is that first, there should be a commitment to respect and observe truth, according to all the provisions that have been agreed upon during back in 1994, 1995. Second, it should be supplemented by confidence-building measures. It should be supplemented by security guarantees. And third, it's something that about what Sergey Strokan has just mentioned recently. It should be supplemented by mechanisms of incident investigation. In any time there has been such a sporadic shooting, for instance. So it all should be actually put in place. But this actually is the first step in order to come to the final settlement of this issue.
Vladimir, as we are running out of time, let me ask you the final question. So we've started our program with the notion that President Sargsyan said no to the initiative which came from Moscow and was supported by Baku. How long will it take him to say yes?
It's a good question. I think that he, like it or not, despite the fact that he's kept hostage, let's say, to the actual frustration of the Armenian street, he will have to say yes at some point, because after all the odds are against him. So many others are saying yes. It should be settled. I'm not only referring to Baku and Moscow, but to the world community. He actually would like this issue to be at least to be tackled, not necessarily settled, but tackled. In order to start the ball rolling, you have to get to the negotiation table. After all, let's say there is a very good maxim or axiom, by the way, very much liked by Winston Churchill: "Jaw is better than war."
Absolutely. That's a good final touch to our program. And let us hope that we'll get back to that quote of Churchill, who was a peacemaker. Yeah. Thank you, Vladimir, for that insightful analysis. And let me remind our audience that was Vladimir Miheev, independent experts in foreign affairs, and anchor and author of Troika Report project. I hope you enjoyed his comments. And that was analytical program Pro and Contra, coming out on the Moscow-Baku portal with me, Sergey Strokan, its author and presenter. Join me next time for a detailed review of the events and trends in global and regional politics. Stay with us. Goodbye and take care.